Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
Now we have the woke craziness, which is invading every area of our lives. We have to fight back.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring the best guest gossip, news and stories from our studio at GB News here in the heart of Westminster. It's been a week when the Labour government has started to bare its left-wing teeth by taking over the running of British Steel, a move which looks like the precursor towards a full-blown nationalisation of the Scunthorpe plant. The crisis there, and that led to MPs and peers being brought back here to Westminster to pass a law in a single day to give Labour the power to run the plant, has once again shone a light on the UK's relationship with China, because the owners of British Steel are Chinese. And that comes as Liberal Democrat MP Wira Hobhouse was banned from entering Hong Kong to see her newborn grandson, apparently because of comments she'd made in the past about China. She said that's a wake-up call for MPs and peers. So, this week we're talking about the UK's vexed relationship with China with Sir Iain Duncan-Smith, the co-chair in the UK of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China and a former Conservative leader. That comes very soon. Plus, as it's Easter weekend, I thought I'd look at why it seems to me that Easter, the most important time in a Christian calendar, is being slowly erased from modern daily British life. That's with Andrew Rosindell later. But first, to British Steel and to China. This week, Trade Minister Doug Tagazano was in China just as an MP was banned from entering Hong Kong for remarks she had made about China in the past, apparently. And that came as the government stepped in to run a Chinese steel plant in Scunthorpe. With me to discuss all this is the former Tory leader, Sir Iain Duncan-Smith, the co-chair in the UK of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. Iain Duncan-Smith, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Great to have you on and breaking into your Easter break. Thank you for coming on. Very quickly, what is your status currently with China, your personal status?
I'm sanctioned by the Chinese government. There's a number of us, I think 7 politicians in the UK Parliament. There are a number of politicians in Europe as well, and they're all members of IPAC, essentially. So the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. China absolutely furious with us because it was through the Interparliamentary Alliance on China and a man called Professor Zenz, who found the documents, that we were able to get hold of all the documents relating to the treatment of the Uyghur in Xinjiang. And those documents showed that there was a systematic attempt to eradicate the Uyghur as an ethnic group, a troublesome ethnic group in China. And so we published all of that all over the world on the same day. We have 40 countries that are members of IPAC now, including the United States. And so they went absolutely bonkers about it and sanctioned a number of people, both in Europe and in the UK. American co-chair once was Rubio. He's now had to step down, and he was also sanctioned as well.
He's, of course, is the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. What does it mean if you're sanctioned? It means if you got to be careful where you go to in the world.
Well, yeah, basically they sanction all your family too. What it means is you can't have any investments or any monies in banks. It gets seized, and you're, strictly speaking, not meant to go anywhere near any countries, certainly any Chinese-owned country, as it were, or territory. But also it turns out now that we've had at least 2 IPAC members in the UK, the latest in Hong Kong, but there was one previously when another IPAC member was visiting a country in Africa and got held at the airport and sent away, and that country has huge sums of money being pumped into it by China. So China reach to make these sanctions even further is quite great.
And of course, yeah, you said there your family are caught by this.
I have a daughter who works elsewhere, shall we say, not in the UK, and she and her husband were planning to come back during COVID, after the COVID they lifted it, and their aircraft, the airline, as they had tickets for, so they could have their tickets back if they applied like everybody else, and they would just renew them. She uses her maiden name, he uses his own name, and when they applied, he got his back in a week. And this was about 4 weeks after I got sanctioned, and she's never heard from him again. And it turns out that the company was owned by China. So they mean business when
and just as a dad, does that give you pause for thought? You're taking risks with your professional life, which are having a bearing on your daughter who's not even in the UK.
Yeah, well, you like everything else, they've got used to it, I think, sadly, in my family. And I mean, to be fair to her, she sent me a text saying, "Thanks, Dad," which is the level. But, I apologize to everybody for doing it, but the reality is you just got to get on with these things. Yeah. And if you cave in like that, then others, will have lost the chance to get some freedom. So I guess I'm sorry about all of that. But you're not really saying nothing much I can do about it.
You're taking a stand. You mentioned you alluded there to Vera Hobhouse. She's just become a grandmother, and then she was going to see her baby grandchild in Hong Kong, and she was turned away at the airport. Is she one of the sanctioned MPs? Do you know?
She's not actually. She's a member of IPAC though, and they will have noticed that. It's worth bearing in mind those who are sanctioned, like myself, do have things like wolf warriors following us every now and then, and we had a lot of that in my case, but others have had it too, I think, where these characters are very low-level operatives of the security system in China, and what they do is they impersonate you around the world, trying to persuade everybody that you change your mind and you think that President Xi is a magnificent humanitarian.
Is that also on online? Are the wolf warriors online?
Yeah, mostly through emails and other contacts. It's sort of stopped recently, but I used to get lots of emails from people, senators and others in different countries, including the States, who'd say, "I just received this email from you. I'm just not sure why you sent it to tell me how much you love President Xi," that sort of thing.
It is alarming and worrying, isn't it? I mean, you saw what's happening with China's back in the news now with the British Steel situation too. I saw you in Parliament last Saturday calling for a sunset on the UK ownership, frankly, of that plant. Well, they're not literally ownership, not nationalised, but certainly running of that plant. But that has brought into focus, hasn't it, our relationship with China? What's your take on what happened at British Steel? Do you think the Chinese state has some involvement there, or was it a Chinese company which tried to buy a company which was losing money and has failed to make a go of it?
First of all, we need to establish the reality of life with China. There is no such thing as a private company in China. They're all tied umbilically to the Chinese government and the Chinese security services. The national security law in China obligates every single organization and company to hand over any of its data details or basically receive any instructions necessary in the course of their lives. So that makes you question, really, and I did at the time say to the then Conservative government, you cannot let this critical bit of production of steel, particularly the blast furnace, the only one we've got going now, the others in South Wales have been shut down. You cannot let that go into the hands of a country which is not a friend and does not abide by the WTO rules on trade. And you've seen the results of that, I'm sad to say. But somebody said, well, there's a conspiracy theory that somehow they were doing it because it was all part of a Chinese takeover. In fact, it's not a conspiracy theory. If you think about it, in shutting down the blast furnaces, and you ask yourself the question, why would a Chinese company want to invest in what was clearly a loss-making organization at the time? The key, I think, is shutting down the blast furnaces. If you shut the blast furnaces down there, what actually happens is the plan, I'm absolutely certain, would have been to import slab steel from China and then mill it in the UK, rebadging it as British steel, and then getting around sanctions and tariffs in other countries. So this was not a general point. You can see the strategic value of owning British steel and at the same time giving a way out for Chinese overproduction of steel in China.
I mean, some say that your Tory government in 2020 selling it to a Chinese-owned company meant that the state taxpayers, like they are now, were not on the hook for it for 5 years. So is that a good thing? Maybe that the China have decided to put their money into this plant. They've invested whatever £1 billion in keeping it going.
Well, as I say, China sees the long term in a way that elected governments cannot. So China sees that money is an investment in finding a way out for Chinese steel. China produces about 1 billion tons of steel a year. Their own home market was pretty flat because the great housing, the property scandal that's been taking place in China has meant that very little of that has been built, which is where most of their steel domestically was used. So they're dumping it elsewhere. We're not alone. They've dumped it in South Korea, dumped it in Vietnam. There's huge rows going on all over the world. Europe's, arguing with them and tariffing them on steel. We don't. So investing in that gives you a way out. Did it save money? Well, you can question that, really, because we gave them a lump of money at the same time as they took it over. So here the question arises, who's thinking in the long term and who's looking in the short term? And I'm afraid it doesn't matter whether you're Labour or Conservative, we get short-term decision-making.
What's your take on this Labour attempt at a cautious rapprochement with Beijing? I think this week, Douglas Alexander has been out in China. They've raised the issue of Weir Hobhouse in person there with the Chinese. There was a degree of Rachel Reeves was out there early this year. We're expecting a visit of the Chinese premier here, or maybe Keir Starmer goes there this year. Do you approve of this? Is it risky?
I think they're mad. I have no idea. We went through this, if you remember, under George Osborne. At the time, I said, I don't understand what we think we're achieving because the level of their investments wasn't that great. And importantly, what they did do is dump all their products on us, and Chinese students proliferated as a result. The universities have become completely dependent on that money now from China, such that they're very, very careful and won't allow much criticism of China. And you've got Chinese postgrad students ending up on defense contracts and things because of our failure to check. So I thought we'd been through that and we'd learned the lesson. And that I was one of those who charged in and tried to stop Boris Johnson from awarding the 5G contract to Huawei. It was a huge battle. We eventually won it at the same time, but not long after. They gave this contract over the steel making, and we didn't stop that. But the point that we're making is that we should have learnt the lesson from what happened and not had to rediscover it. And so this government's come in desperate for growth and having honestly screwed up in their original budgets last year, which has overtaxed everything. They're now desperate, thinking China's going to give them growth. China's not going to do that. And this is all driven by the net zero nonsense that we've got from Miliband, who is so ideologically riven by this idea that he will literally turn a blind eye to slave labour in the solar arrays, which there is proof of, which we are buying and they want more of.
That's the wind turbines you mean there?
Yeah, both sides, solar array and the wind turbines, have used forced labour, most of it Uyghur, by the way. There's millions of Uyghur men in forced labour. The women are being sterilised forcibly and the children are in re-education.
Is that proven, Iain, for the slave labour?
Yeah, it's completely proven. Yeah, it's all from we published all the documents about what's actually happening. And you saw even the BBC did this program where they showed you the columns of these individuals all chained up going off into trains. They're all Uyghur men. They are all over China, 1,000 miles away from their homes. And the polysilicon that is critical to solar arrays, a huge amount of that is produced in Xinjiang and made by slave labor, which is why they can cheapen their products so dramatically, as well as illegally subsidizing them with central bank funding. So we buy cheap because that's why China dominates the market now, because they've undercut every single commercial company in the world. They do it everywhere, in everything, and we turn a blind eye.
So do you, given that rather negative view of China, and China would dispute that, of course, but do you think that what Trump's done by imposing these huge tariffs on China is a good thing, maybe, in a perverse way?
I'm not anti-China. There's a lot of decent Chinese people. It's the Communist Party of China that governs it, which is the problem here. Because, I think if they had a democratic existence there would be a government there that was democratic where we could deal with them. But no democratic government would have slave labor, forced labor, and brutality, and the highest number of executions of pretty much any country in the world, forced organ harvesting. So when you deal with President Trump, the question you were asking just now, the point is, I am a free marketeer under the rules. So if you have rules, you can have a free market. If you don't have rules and countries abuse those, then you can't have a free market. And he's right in that regard, although I'm not keen on massive tariffs. But I do, in China's case, see that it's different from the Europe, different from the UK, because they have manipulated their currencies and they do all the things I've talked about now, undercutting a market which has to be under a rules-based system. This will be turned obey.
Forgive me, so to be quite clear, you're against these big tariffs imposed on China, despite what we're saying.
Against the big tariffs that he's imposed on every single country around the world, what I say is he needs to be more selective when it comes to tariffs. The truth is, the dangerous countries that have undermined that market that he's complaining about, the undermining, are massively China and the dictatorships. And so what we need to deal with is what is actually the reality, which is the abuse of the World Trade Organization rules-based order. And even if you trash them by putting extra taxes, that needs also to be established. But in the case of China, it's so great that you have to do something about it. Instead of running there on bended knee, kowtowing, as I call it, to China now by the British government, we should be very careful about our dealings with them and sup with a very, very long spoon.
But just finally on this, I mean, your colleagues in the last Conservative government, they all did it. Although certainly until Theresa May and Boris Johnson, they kind of further descended. But before that, certainly Osborne and Cameron did it. You can see the need, though. Growth is so important for people here. If you can see an easy way of doing that with China, is it a risk worth taking, or is that a risk too far?
Well, we've taken the risk. Yes, the aftermath of the risk. So many companies were encouraged to go to China for cheap production. They questioned not how that was done, and they got cheaper product. The truth is now that if you look at the area around the South China Seas, Taiwan, China itself, and some of those others like the Philippines, 72% of everything made now is made in that area. Now, that means we have stripped out huge amounts of industry from the Western democracies. We now rely almost completely on a country, particularly in the case of China, whose regime and whose abuse of the World Trade Organization is astonishing. And so on that basis, we've turned a blind eye to it already. Now what are we seeing? We are seeing the fact that we're having to increase defense spending because the threat from those dictatorships, Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, all together, working together. We've seen that threat grow, so why are we doing this? We have now to have defense. But unlike the 1940s, we don't have the ability to make things so much as we did. We've got to bring it back. Doing that is a big deal for us because we were so slack about not seeing a strategic role for certain industries. So now what we have to do is define strategic industries, and I'm afraid none of those countries can be involved in those, and that has to be for Europe as well and the United States. So this is a very dangerous period, but understanding what you're up against is the number one rule of getting it right, and I'm afraid the present government is all over the place on this. On the one hand, they're running over to China. On the other hand, they're calling out a Chinese company that they think has manipulated some of the facets of their takeover. And finally, of course, what do we hear? We hear President Xi standing up and warning the UK 3 days ago that they need to watch out. If they carry on like this, then that will have repercussions on their relationship. So you can see how Downing Street is suddenly shuddering at the idea that China may not want to do business with us. And the answer is we shouldn't really be running to them to try and get them to do it because it puts us in their hands.
Well, Sir Iain Duncan-Smith, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast with a salutary warning maybe about Beijing and London for the future. Thank you for joining us. Iain Duncan-Smith, thank you. Now, next up, Easter. This is the most important day this weekend in the Christian calendar, but for many, they see a gradual erosion, almost an expunging of this important festival in our national life. Why is it happening? One MP who's concerned is Andrew Rosindell MP, the Conservative MP for Romford, and he joins me now. Andrew Rosindell, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Great to have you here. Is the observance of Easter by our institutions, government, in decline?
I'm afraid I think it is. I believe that Easter is the holiest time of year in the Christian calendar. It's very much part of our culture. I grew up being solemn on Good Friday today, believing that Good Friday is a day that we should reflect about the importance of our religion in our culture, our way of life, but also going to church, those who wanted to go to church. I just think it's being lost. I don't think this is being reflected by our institutions, by our schools, by the media. I think GB News may be an exception to that.
Well,
I've seen what you're doing, and it's fantastic.
We're doing a moment of reflection through Lent.
Exactly.
We did it through Advent, and it was extremely popular. I mean, extremely popular. So, I mean, some might think surprisingly popular. I think people out there are craving some spirituality, even from a news channel.
But at Christmas, I think you did the same thing. And I think it's fantastic you're doing that. But sadly, so many of our institutions are now almost erasing our Christian heritage from all that we do. And I raised it in Parliament last week about the Easter adjournment
Well,
debate.
I'm going to ask you about that. What happened last week?
Well, I noticed that the Easter adjournment debate, and I've been an MP like 24 years, and I remember the Easter adjournment debates. In fact, Sir David Amess used to go every time. And it used to be the final debate for Easter where MPs can raise any topic they choose. And it was always called Easter.
It wasn't a religious thing. It was
No,
called that.
That was called Easter.
It allowed you maybe to say something religious.
And some did and some didn't.
Exactly.
But they seemed to take away the name of Easter and just called it a general debate for matters for the adjournment.
Yeah.
And I noticed that. I, in fact,
On the order paper.
On the order paper, it's printed. And I actually raised it with Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, who advised me to raise a point of order. He hadn't noticed that had happened. So I raised it as a point of order. And the Deputy Speaker in the chair then referred it to Bob Blackman, who's the chairman of the Backbench Business Committee.
Also a Tory MP.
Also a Tory MP. And I think it was a shock for everybody that this has happened. And nobody noticed that the name of the debate had changed. But immediately Bob Blackman said, no, it should be the Easter German debate. And then it became again the Easter German debate.
I can testify on the screens. It said
It was
Easter
there.
German, and you because you protested. But if people like you and Bob Blackman weren't alert to this, it would just carry on this erasure, removal of this language about our national history.
But this is going on everywhere. And look, there's talk of I know it's a bit silly, but Easter eggs in all the shops. Very few of them actually say Easter now. So there's things like that gradually generations will grow up, unlike perhaps you and I that grew up understanding the importance of this part of our heritage and culture. It's not just about faith. Faith is vital, very important, but not everyone is a Christian and not everyone wants to go to church, but it's still part of our culture. We are a Christian country, both in terms of our religious faith traditionally, but also our culture. And if we discard those traditions and if we don't cherish them and look after them, then we're creating a vacuum. And what's going to replace those traditions with? What vacuum? Who's going to fill that vacuum? And it worries me that if we don't uphold these things, if we don't cherish these things and defend our Christian heritage, then we're going to be in a very mushy situation where other religions and other traditions can come and say, well, we're going to dominate. We're going to push our views.
Is it right, though, that all religions are treated in the same way? Or do you know, the Islamic faith, Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, or should we favour the Christian?
Well, we do already. We are the Church of England is the established church. Yes. So I believe in the established Church of England. I believe that you have the Church of England as the religion of the state, where the king is the head of that church. But all religions and denominations are equal under the law.
Yes.
So every religion must accept that the laws, traditions, and the conventions of this country are Christian, and the Church of England is the state religion, and the king is the head of that church. They must respect that, and then they are protected and defended to worship in any way they choose within the law, whichever denomination or religion. So they're all equal under the law, but ultimately the cross is on the crown. If you look at the crown, there's a cross.
Yes.
And that tells us the religion of this country is Christian, and that must be upheld.
Why is there a nervousness about the powers that be in Parliament? Why are they not calling a debate, the Easter debate, calling it something else?
Well, we don't really know who changed the name of it, but it's wrong.
It's happening. I wonder why you see it elsewhere too. You see
Yeah.
Winterbull, not Christmas, this kind of thing in the old
Very frustrating. Look, I don't know. All I will say is that throughout my lifetime, I've noticed, as I'm sure you have, Chris, this political correctness getting more and more extreme. Now we have the woke craziness, which is invading every area of our lives. We have to fight back and we have to crush it because it's just undermining everything that's great about our country. And therefore, I like what Donald Trump has done in the United States. You know, he's got rid of, completely erased the woke agenda from all areas of government, and I think the next Conservative government needs to do exactly the same thing.
In America, they wear their faith on their sleeves. Donald Trump says a lot of things about Christianity, doesn't he? Do you want to see more of that from our leaders in this country, wearing their faith, their Christianity?
I think it's down to the individual. Nobody should have to wear their faith on their sleeve. It's a very personal thing. But I do believe that whatever religion you are or denomination, and even if you have no faith, I think you have to respect that the foundations of our constitution, of our laws and our traditions, our customs are of a Christian nature. And if you take away those foundations, what's going to happen to our country?
And there's a risk too. Do you find it a bit performative, certainly on social media? So you see Keir Starmer marking Eid or marking the Isfar, I think it's part of the Islamic faith, these kind of things. And then someone say he hadn't marked Palm Sunday last Sunday. And then that annoys people. I mean, it's quite a dangerous road to go down, isn't it, in politics, if you mark certain days, not other days. Everyone wonders, why not me?
I certainly celebrate with denominations and religions in my constituency if they have a special event, whether it's the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Hindus, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
What I always do is to put on my own social media things that celebrate our Christian heritage. But if you start putting things on about every religion, you're going to miss one out. And in the end, you're going to offend somebody. So I personally stick to the Christian faith because that's my faith.
Yeah.
And I respect and celebrate with my constituents when they have events and when they have special celebrations, because I respect freedom of religion in this country and would defend that. But I personally, on social media, I will only really usually
it's quite risky.
Not the Christian.
It goes towards identity, doesn't it? And that's always where the difficult conversations are being had. We had this week the Supreme Court ruling what a woman is. That might kill off that debate. We don't know. But this issue of identity, faith, gender.
It's great to hear that the Supreme Court have done something good at last, having made so many rulings that are not so good. But this is the right decision. But look, I just think this whole thing is an attack on our way of life. And I got in politics because I believe in this country. I believe in our British heritage.
You're wearing your union.
I'm wearing my Union Jack. I always do. And I think that we should fly the Union flag or the Union Jack from all public buildings and schools. I'd like to see all schools fly that. And I'd like to see the National Anthem sung in assemblies in schools as well. And I think...
Not at the moment.
No, it's not. It's not at the moment. And when I go to schools and present Portrait of the King, which I do, to all the schools in my constituency, I do say to the head teacher, can they sing the National Anthem?
And what do they do this?
Well, normally they do, but look, there is a sort of like attitude now that every other culture, every other religion can be celebrated, but we've got to be a bit embarrassed about our own. I just think we have to reverse this. There has to be a fight back.
A fight back. Starting maybe on national days. It's St. George's Day, Wednesday next week, the 23rd of April. You want to see flags raised for that too?
100%. So we are English. This is England. St. George's Day is the day of our patron saint. It's effectively our national day for England. It firstly should be a bank holiday, and my first 10-minute raw bill was to make St. George's Day a public holiday. It sadly hasn't happened.
Because the 1st of May being so near to it, I think.
Well, I suggested that perhaps May Day could be dumped and we have St. George's Day instead. That didn't go down well on some of the Labour benches.
It would separate it out from the Whitsun bank holiday, which is late May.
Yeah.
It had a longer gap between the two.
Yeah. So I do think we should celebrate St. George's Day. And the same with St. Patrick's Day, St. David's Day. And
makes them all bank
St. Andrew's
holidays?
Day. Well, possibly across the country, but certainly in their own. I think actually in Northern Ireland, St. Patrick's Day is a public holiday. I think in St. Andrew's Day, I think the Scottish Government may have made it. Need to check that. I don't think St. David's Day is a public holiday in Wales, but certainly St. George's Day. Who celebrates it? Hardly anybody does. Local councils, mine does, actually. We have celebrations.
You personally celebrate it?
I personally celebrate it. We have a big event in the Houses of Parliament. Mr. Speaker's hosting it in Speaker's House on the 23rd. And we have events in the constituency. But the whole of the country doesn't necessarily do that. And I just think we should make more of our patron saint's day.
Because symbols matter, don't they? They matter more and more, I think. With, the unsorted out debate is one on migration. People see their communities being diluted from who was there before, and they have new cultures come in. and that some see that as an attack on the culture they're used to. Is that why it matters?
Identity matters. So we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different ancestry, and we cherish that. We care about where we're from. And I think in today's world, we're sort of losing that. So national symbols are vital. Our national religion is vital, which we've spoken about. Our local identity is also very important to us, and which is why government bodies sometimes mess things up and we lose identity. So in my area particularly, we have a huge issue because we're Essex. But for years and years and years, government bureaucrats have said, no, you're East London now. So we're losing our identity. And with these changes that the government are bringing in with local government, it's really highlighting the importance of recalibrating how these things work. But national symbols and local identity are very important, but it's often discarded as a peripheral thing, nothing very important. But I think it is. I think if you get the identity right and the belonging, that goes, then you have responsibility.
That kind of bloodless approach to boundaries. I remember when Michael Heseltine in 74 redrew those boundaries. I think he said he flew over the country, and I mean, it's really important. I mean, and we've seen also the renaming of people's streets, and that isn't the noise people who lived there. And you got issues where you want to be in Essex, not East London, don't you? Some of your constituents, some of your local people.
Yes,
this really matters.
So I think they've muddled it all up with different boundaries for different purposes. And what has to happen is you've got to divide between administrative boundaries, which is what local government is, and what are real places that are rooted in history and geography and also social interaction. So, if you come to Romford, you're Essex. We have more in common with Brentwood than we do with Brentford, which is the other side of London. But we're apparently in the same region. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think the whole thing needs to be recalibrated. So areas like Romford and Havering can really connect more with the area of the country and the county that we're traditionally part of, which is Essex.
And it may start with flying the county flag.
Well, we do. So we've now made that a tradition. So Havering Town Hall flies the Essex flag on Essex Day, but it really should fly every day of the year.
And other flags too. They're flying them, I think you said it earlier to me off air in that House of Commons. Maybe number 10, will they fly one of these flags, one of the counties?
Well, so there's a story going on here, which your viewers ought to know about, especially those that live in the Middlesex area. So the Middlesex Society is established by the great man Russell Grant. So they purchased a Middlesex flag to fly number 10 Downing Street on Middlesex Day, which I think is the 17th of May. And Boris started that tradition. Rishi continued with it. So I'm going to say here and now to the Prime Minister, I hope he's going to continue with that tradition, because number 10 Downing Street is in the historic county of Middlesex. And why can't we celebrate that historic day? There may not be a county council for Middlesex anymore, but still people identify with that historic county.
You've heard he won't fly it?
I've heard rumours.
Right.
But I'm going to be raising it to see if he... Look, it costs nothing to respect Middlesex Day and respect the traditional county of Middlesex. I'm not suggesting he flies every flag of every county, but because Westminster is part of the historic county of Middlesex, we should at least respect Middlesex Day.
Okay, well, on that note, we'll look out for the flag on the flagpole on May 17th. Andy Rosindell, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Great to have you here. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you earlier to Iain Duncan-Smith, and thank you for listening to us wherever you are in the country or the world. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. What's your Twitter handle, Andrew?
Well, it's at Andrew Rosindell, so it's an easy one.
Very straightforward. Email me to chopper@gbnews.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify. That helps other people to find it. Thank the great team of GB News colleagues behind the podcast, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh back at HQ. The little worker wasps, the worker bees, here in GB News Studios, Westminster, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. And most importantly of all, thank you again for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, and Andrew Rosindell certainly does, who catch me during the week on GB News with your latest political stories and updates, and presenting the occasional programme too, and keep it up to date with our best reporting on our website, gbnews.com. But until next time, happy Easter and cheerio.